The chamber is open and full of whispers.
The summer of 1992 is supposed to be simple. Jean and Daniel Granger have spent the last year making their peace with the impossible. Their daughter attends a school they cannot see. She studies subjects that violate physics, chemistry, and most of what two Oxford dentists have spent their professional lives believing to be true about the nature of matter. She returns each June carrying knowledge that no university in England could have given her, and she returns changed, not in the ways that frightened parents fear, but in the deeper way, the quieter way. More certain of herself each time, more settled, more hers. They have learned to accept the unexplainable. What they have not learned is that acceptance and preparation are entirely different things. So when Hermione asks to stop at Gringotts before the main shopping trip, standard procedure, she explains she needs to exchange Muggle sterling for galleons. They agree without question. They have done this once before, during that first bewildering September when everything changed. And they remember it as cold marble, and very small bankers, and a cart ride that left Daniel mildly motion sick. Routine. The goblin at the counter is named Griprick. He is 411 years old, and he processes currency exchanges the way Daniel Granger fills a molar, with the efficient, unhurried precision of a person who has done this exact thing enough times to stop counting. He does not expect this to be different. The identity verification ritual is not complicated. Griprick places an enchanted sheet on the counter. Standard issue parchment, treated with arithmetic bloodline tracing spells that have not changed in 6 centuries. A single drop of blood. A family tree 4 generations deep. Confirmation of identity. That is all it has ever been. Hermione pricks her finger with the ceremonial silver needle. 1 drop falls. The parchment begins to write, and does not stop. The arithmetic ink branches and splits and branches again. The family tree extends backward, with the mechanical certainty of something that has been waiting to write itself for a very long time. Past the Grangers of Oxford, past the dentists and the school teachers, and the Victorian tradesmen, past the Somerset farming family, and further still. The ink runs out of space. It does not stop. It climbs the edge of the parchment, crosses onto the marble counter, follows the veining in the stone as though the stone is simply another surface to claim. It moves up the wall of the teller's booth, branching sideways, splitting into secondary lines and tertiary lines and connections between connections, filling 40 square feet of Gringotts architecture and ancient, smoking script before it finally, slowly thins. Griprick has not moved. In 411 years, this has happened exactly 0 times. He taps the bell beneath the counter. 3 times. Not the bell for a flagged account. Not the bell for a standard inquiry. The bell that has not been used in his living memory, which is to say in roughly 2/3 of recorded British magical history. It calls the director. They move the Granger family to a private chamber 30 feet below the main hall. The room is smaller than the vaulted space above, but heavier, older stone. Older air, the particular cold of a place that has been sealed and waiting. Jean and Daniel sit very still on one side of a table that is clearly not designed for human proportions. 3 goblins arrange themselves opposite, with the gravity of a bench about to deliver a verdict. Hermione sits between her parents and studies the ink still moving faintly at the edges of her fingertip. The director's name is Ironscale. He is older than Griprick. He spreads documents across the table with the careful reverence of someone handling evidence of an event they had quietly stopped believing would ever arrive. The Dagworth Granger estate, he begins, has been held in escrow since 1762. Hector Dagworth Granger, founder of the most extraordinary society of potioneers, one of the most decorated magical researchers of the 18th century, died without a recognized magical heir. His only daughter had been disowned at 17. Married a Muggle clockmaker, declared a squib by the ministry's predecessor council, and stricken from every official record. Not from her blood. Never from her blood. Under Goblin banking law, estates with no recognized claimant are held indefinitely, accruing interest, pending the emergence of a qualifying heir through the squib reversion clause. When a magical bloodline passes through a declared squib line and re-emerges with full capability in a descendant, the claim reverts. The Ministry of Magic has no jurisdiction over this process. Hermione tracks every word with the focused stillness of someone cataloging in real time. 230 years. The blood lying dormant through a woman who was told she was nothing, passing through her children and their children, and onward through ordinary people living ordinary lives, until it arrived here. This morning. On what was supposed to be a simple currency exchange, Iron Scale sets a second parchment on the table. This one is older, much older, nearly translucent with age. The ink is not black. It is a deep, bruised purple, the color of something caught between blood and night, and it does not lie flat. It seems to carry weight above its surface, as though the words printed on it have mass of their own. The Dagworth Granger family held, through a secondary alliance recorded in 1619, a matrilineal co-seat in the House of Peverell. The room goes quiet in a way that has nothing to do with sound. Hermione knows the name. She read it in a supplementary history of magic text, a footnote about 3 brothers and 3 objects, and a family said to have died out without heirs, centuries ago. Without recognized heirs. She understands now precisely what that phrase has always meant. It means without heirs the ministry bothered to look for. The Potter family, Iron Scale continues carefully, holds the primary Peverell seat, dormant but recognized as Potter property for 3 generations. The secondary seat, the matrilineal co-seat, established in 1619, predating the accord that divided the Peverell estate by 74 years, has never been claimed. It has been waiting. If both seats are claimed, Hermione says, and her voice is very level, and the secondary seat is older, under 17th century wizarding common law, Iron Scale says, the older seat holds precedence. The holder of the older Peverell seat is, technically, the senior member of the house. What does that mean? Says Jean Granger. Quietly, Hermione does not answer immediately. She is looking at the deep purple parchment. She is thinking about a boy she knows, messy black hair, glasses, raised in a cupboard under a staircase, kept in the dark about every piece of his own existence, who does not yet know he has inherited anything, who will, when someone finally tells him, claim the primary Peverell seat, who will discover, at that moment, that the seat is not first, that there is already a senior member of his house. She will be his liege. The claiming ritual takes 47 minutes. Goblins are efficient when motivated, and they are very motivated. 2 rings emerge from the escrow vault, both preserved under stasis charms that hum faintly against Hermione's fingers when Iron Scale opens the case, a frequency just below hearing, like the resonance of a tuning fork pressed too close to bone. The first ring is the Dagworth Granger signet, silver, set with a deep green stone carved into the shape of a cauldron. The precision of the carving is not decorative, it is the work of someone making something permanent. The motto scrolled around the interior band reads, Numquam sin ration. Never without reason. She puts it on. The second ring is older. The metal is something between silver and moonlight. Mithril, Iron Scale says. The word carrying the weight of something that is not quite a noun in any living language. Mined from deep within the earth, and worked by smiths who charged accordingly and worked slowly, because accuracy mattered more than speed. The stone is black, polished to a mirror finish. When Hermione looks into it, she sees something that is almost but not exactly her own reflection. Something older, something that has been sitting in this case for 230 years, waiting for a face it recognized. She puts it on. The world does not change dramatically, no surge, no crack in the air. What happens is smaller than that, and more permanent. It is the sensation of a lens clarifying, of depth of field snapping into focus across a range she had not understood was blurred. She can feel the precise weight of both rings. She can feel the difference between them. The Dagworth Granger ring sits against her finger with the density of something that knows what it is. The Peverell ring sits differently. Older, heavier in a way that has nothing to do with the mass of the metal. Like a door that has been waiting to be opened has finally recognized its key. Lady Hermione Dagworth Granger Peverell. Lady of 2 houses. 4 Wizengamot seats, 2 through the Dagworth Granger line, 2 through the Peverell secondary. Legal standing in a parallel system of law that most of the wizarding world has forgotten exists. She is 12 years old. She is the most legally powerful witch in Britain. They emerge from Gringotts 2 hours later than planned, into the gold warmth of a Diagon Alley afternoon. Jean and Daniel walk with the careful, deliberate calm of good parents whose world has shifted beneath them and who are managing it one breath at a time. Hermione is already thinking about what comes next. Flourish and Blots is crowded. She sees the Weasley family near the entrance, Arthur with reading glasses pushed up his forehead, Ginny trailing behind her brothers. She sees, a few feet further along, silver blonde hair and immaculate robes that cost more than most wizards earn in a year. Lucius Malfoy turns. He sees her. And then, before she has crossed 5 feet of cobblestone, he sees her hands. Lucius Malfoy is many things. He is not unintelligent. He was raised in a world where rings mean everything, where the signet of a noble house is not jewelry but a title, a claim, a fact recorded in flesh and metal. He has spent his entire life navigating exactly this system. He knows the Dagworth Granger crest. He knows what mithril means. He knows the shape of the Peverell secondary sigil as well as he knows his own name, because in his world those two pieces of knowledge sit in the same category, things that matter. His pale eyes settle on the second ring. Something moves behind them, old, educated, suddenly and very precisely recalculating. "Miss," he begins. "Lady Dagworth Granger Peverell," Hermione says. Not heated, not sharp. The simple, factual tone of someone noting that a calculation contains an error. "You may bow, Mr. Malfoy. I believe that's the appropriate form." A moment, long and suspended. Lucius Malfoy bows. It is precisely as deep as protocol demands, a holder of 3 seats acknowledging a holder of 4. Not 1 degree deeper, not 1 degree less, but it is a bow. And Ginny Weasley is standing 20 feet away, watching every inch of it. And Arthur Weasley, who has spent his career watching the Malfoy family treat everyone around them as furniture, goes very, very still. Hermione turns away. She walks into Flourish and Blots and she buys books, armfuls of them, because she is still herself, always herself. And while she moves through the aisles, she opens her notebook to a fresh page, not a book list, a different kind of list, everything that is about to change. 3 weeks after Gringotts, Hermione sits at her desk and writes letters. Not school letters, not the kind that travel by ordinary post or Hogwarts owl. These travel by a different bird, one of the large gray owls from Gringotts' own owlery. Birds that have been carrying legal correspondence across Britain since before the modern postal service existed, and that treat every delivery as a matter of formal record. She writes by lamplight, long past the hour her parents would prefer, because the texts delivered in sealed leather cases after the inheritance claiming do not read quickly, and she is only on her second pass of the most important of them. On the Laws of the Noble Houses, 7th edition. The Peverell Concordat of 1693. A history of old magic and house law, written before the Confederation existed. She has read them all once, quickly. She is reading them again slowly. The difference matters. What she is learning, the wizarding world operates on 2 entirely separate legal systems that have been running simultaneously for centuries. Nearly everyone has forgotten this. The first is ministry law. The Wizengamot, the statutes, the trace, the blood status records, the regulations governing underage magic, the visible machinery of the wizarding state. Hermione knows this system. She has spent a year inside it. The second is older than the ministry, older, even, than the statute of secrecy. House law, the legal framework of the noble and ancient houses. Built before any ministry decree existed, never formally abolished because abolishing it would require a unanimous Wizengamot vote, and the houses that still existed had never agreed to dissolve the very protections that underwrote their own power. House law is not a museum piece. It is a parallel system, running beside ministry law at every moment. Simply ignored by everyone who has not had reason to invoke it. She has reason now. She finds the footnote on page 412 of the Practitioner's Guide at midnight. It sits at the bottom of a dense page about wardship rights, set in smaller type than the surrounding text, the kind of footnote that indicates an exception so rarely used that the author did not expect many readers to need it. Note that the trace has historically been suspended in the presence of an active house wardship. As heads of houses are considered fully responsible for the magical conduct of those under their protection, ministry oversight is deemed redundant. This exemption has not been formally tested since 1899. She reads it twice. Then she sets down the book and looks at the lamp. House wardship. A recognized head of house declaring legal responsibility for a person under their protection. Not a ministry designation, not a guardianship arrangement assigned by the wizarding world's equivalent of social services. A house law instrument, recorded at Gringotts, sovereign and untouchable by the ministry's tracking mechanisms. She has been thinking about Harry Potter since the carriage ride home from Diagon Alley, about what his life on Privet Drive actually means, the clothes 3 sizes too large that Ron described once, the way Harry had known almost nothing about his own world before Hogwarts, the deliberate, systematic withholding of everything that should have been his. He has been placed, with intentions she is not yet qualified to fully judge. Inside a cage constructed from strategy and a very particular kind of blindness, the blindness of people who weighed his protection against his agency and called the calculation correct. What Harry Potter has never had is someone who operates outside the cage. She drafts the wardship filing that night. 4 attempts before the language is right. She sends it with the gray Gringotts owl at 6 a.m, before her parents are awake. The response comes back in 3 hours. The filing is valid. She arrives at number 4 Privet Drive on the 14th of August in a carriage, not an ordinary carriage. Registered under the Peverell secondary seat as diplomatic transport, the magical equivalent of an embassy vehicle. Exempt from the muggle-repelling charms that govern magical transportation in non-magical areas. It is pulled by creatures the Dursleys cannot see, driven by a Gringotts liaison officer in Peverell livery, deep blue, threaded with silver, the secondary sigil on the breast pocket, worn with the neutrality of a man who has represented sovereign institutions his entire professional life. The carriage parks itself in front of number 4 with a gravity that this street has never previously experienced. 3 neighbors independently discover they have urgent business indoors. Vernon Dursley opens the door. He is a large man, with a very red face, and the absolute certainty of someone who has never been seriously challenged by anything that could not be dismissed as abnormal and therefore irrelevant. He looks at the carriage. He looks at the girl standing in front of it, 12 years old, leather satchel over one shoulder, 2 rings catching light at angles that do not quite match the August sun. He looks at the document she is already holding out. "Good morning, Mr. Dursley. My name is Lady Hermione Granger Peverell. I am here to invoke a wardship claim under the Peverell House Concordat of 1693, specifically Article 7, which grants the senior co-seat holder of a noble house the right to claim wardship of any member of the house's extended bloodline held in circumstances that do not meet the minimum standards of care stipulated under the old laws. Harry Potter is heir to the Potter secondary Peverell seat. That makes him a member of my house. I am here to claim his wardship." She says this in the tone she uses when presenting a mathematical proof. No heat in it, no performance. The words are accurate and therefore sufficient. Vernon Dursley's face, which begins red, achieves a color that English does not have an adequate adjective for. What comes out of his mouth involves the words abnormal, perfectly normal family, no right, and Dumbledore in that order and at increasing volume, and Hermione waits through all of it the way you wait for a storm to pass before you resume speaking. The Gringotts document is stamped, at the top, in large letters, Sovereign Instrument. Vernon Dursley does not know what a sovereign instrument is. But those 2 words, combined with the carriage and the liaison officer and his expression of absolute professional patience, do something to Vernon's certainty. Something structural. His volume drops. Harry appears at the top of the stairs. He is wearing a shirt 3 sizes too large, sleeves rolled to his elbows, collar falling off one shoulder. He looks down at Hermione with an expression caught precisely between relief and bewilderment, as though some part of him had not been certain, even now, that what he had been told was coming would actually come. He descends the stairs. Hermione steps forward. She places one hand over his, and the Peverell ring presses against her finger with a resonance she feels in her teeth, old and certain. the older house acknowledging blood it had been waiting to find. "Hello, Harry," she says. "Hermione." He looks past her at the carriage. "Is that pulled by something?" "Thestrals. You can't see them yet." A pause. "You will eventually. We should talk about that in the carriage." His trunk is on the pavement in under 10 minutes. Hedwig, offended by the disruption but fundamentally cooperative, consents to ride in her cage on the luggage rack. The Gringotts liaison officer loads Harry's belongings with the efficiency of a man for whom no detail is beneath professional attention and no task is beneath professional dignity. Petunia Dursley stands in the doorway. Hermione has spent 2 years reading people in a world that kept telling her she did not belong in it, and she has developed a precise eye for the things faces do when the person wearing them has not yet decided what to feel. Petunia's expression is not grief, not relief, not quite guilt, though something adjacent to guilt moves through it like weather. It is the face of a woman who made a decision 11 years ago and has been living inside the specific weight of it ever since, not regret for the choice itself, but for what the choice revealed about what she found she was capable of. Hermione catches her eye before climbing in. "Your sister," she says, quietly enough that only Petunia can hear, "was very brave." Petunia Dursley says nothing. She nods once. She closes the door. Inside the carriage, moving through Surrey behind creatures no one on the roadside can see, Hermione explains. She explains house law and ministry law and the precise mechanism by which she has claimed his wardship. She explains the wardship filing and what it means for the trace. She explains Gringotts and the rings and the matrilineal co-seat, and what it means that the older seat holds precedence. Harry listens without interrupting. He does this when something is genuinely serious. His hands rest in his lap. He watches her face. When she finishes, he asks 2 questions. "Does this mean I'm your vassal? Or something?" Technically, under 17th century wizarding common law, yes, Hermione says, though I prefer partner. A silence. The carriage moves. "What do we do next?" She opens the satchel and produces a document approximately 3 inches thick. He looks at it. He looks at her. "Right," he says. The trace on Harry Potter dissolves 41 hours after the wardship filing is recorded at Gringotts, not with any signal, not with ceremony. It simply ceases, the way a sound you have been living inside without knowing it goes silent, and the silence itself is the first evidence it was ever there. Harry is in the Granger sitting room when it happens. He raises his wand, casts Lumos in a muggle house, for the first time in his life, with no concealment and no fear. The light comes. No owl strikes the window. No letter drops through the post slot. No ministry correspondence, no official seal, no threat of expulsion. Nothing. He holds the lit wand and looks at it, and keeps looking at it, and the quality of his silence changes, something long held and long braced against releasing. "Hermione," he says. "Yes?" "I think I'm going to cry." "That seems appropriate," Hermione says, and very carefully turns to look out the window, and says nothing else. In the original timeline, this is the year Hermione spends 3 months petrified in the hospital wing. She knows this in the way she knows most things that haven't happened yet, but feels structurally inevitable, from the evidence. A basilisk loose in the school. Petrification attacks targeting students who get too close to the truth. Hermione, who spends more time in the library than almost anyone else, who would have identified the threat methodically, who would have been moving through that corridor with a mirror in her hand alone, she would have been found clutching a torn page, unable to warn anyone, unable to act. That is not this year. This year she arrives at Hogwarts with 2 rings on her fingers, a legal framework that most of the staff do not know exists, and a specific theory about what is moving through the walls. She arrives with something the original version of this year did not have. Lordship access. The restricted section is, on its surface, what every Hogwarts student understands it to be, a collection of books deemed too dangerous or disturbing for general access. Dark magic theory. Advanced curse work. Material that requires a teacher's written permission to approach and Madame Pince's vigilance to actually reach. What most students do not know, what Hermione herself did not know, until she spent 3 weeks in August reading the Practitioner's Guide with the attention of someone who suspects there is more than one layer, is that the restricted section operates under 2 classification systems simultaneously. The first is the standard classification. Teacher's permission. Madam Pince. Common knowledge. The second is older. Nothing to do with teachers. The Founder's Classification, a system of access encoded into the library's original enchantments by the 4 founders themselves, still running beneath the visible surface, invisible to anyone who does not know to look for it. Salazar Slytherin encoded his vault for Parseltongue speakers. Rowena Ravenclaw encoded hers, for those whose arithmantic signature cleared a specific threshold. Godric Gryffindor encoded his for those who demonstrated courage in the act of claiming access, an interpretive enchantment, she notes, which is exactly the kind of magic Gryffindor would have favored. Helga Hufflepuff encoded hers for those who arrived with clean hands and honest purpose. Hermione, as the holder of a Peverell secondary seat that co-signed Hogwarts' original legal charter, qualifies for something that predates all 4 of those conditions. She finds the panel at the back of the restricted section's 3rd bookcase on the 7th of October at 11:30 at night. It is not hidden, or rather, it is hidden in the specific way that things are hidden when the person who concealed them did not expect anyone who knew to look. She presses the Peverell secondary ring flat against the stone at its center. The panel opens. The Founder vaults are 15 feet by 10. The walls are lined floor to ceiling with shelves holding perhaps 400 volumes, which is not many books by the library standards, and an immense number by any other measure. The air inside is cold in a way that has nothing to do with the castle's October draughts, cold the way very old stone gets when no warmth has moved through it in a very long time. An access log materializes on the single table at the room's center. A Gringotts-style registry, self-inscribing, recording entries in the same deep bruised purple ink she saw on the Peverell documents at the bank. She reads the last entry before her own. 1649. 322 years. She sits down, and she begins. She spends 3 evenings in November in the vaults. On the 2nd evening she finds what she has been searching for, a document in Slytherin's own hand, written in a substitution cipher that maps onto a modified runic alphabet she identifies through comparative analysis with the charts in the 2nd shelf. She works on the cipher for 6 hours across 2 nights. On the 7th of November, it opens. The document is titled, A Record of the Creature Binding and Its Terms. She reads it once, quickly, to understand the shape of it. Then she reads it again slowly, and when she finishes the 2nd reading she sits for a long while in the cold vault air and revises every assumption she has built about the Chamber of Secrets since she first heard the legend in September of first year. Slytherin did not hide a monster for a purity-obsessed heir to unleash on students he deemed unworthy. That is the story that has persisted for centuries, because it matches what everyone already believed about Slytherin, the legend that makes most sense if you have already decided who he was. The document says something else entirely. He bound a creature to Hogwarts' own defense system with specific activation parameters. The basilisk was to stir only if the school was being fundamentally corrupted by those who held power over it, not Muggleborns in the corridors, not students he disapproved of. The governors. The people at the top. A last resort against the betrayal of the founding compact. A check hidden in the walls against the kind of corruption that tends to arrive wearing the face of legitimate authority. She reads the activation parameters 3 times. The diary, the mechanism actually driving the attacks this year, is not part of Slytherin's original design. It is a modification, an override, a secondary layer grafted onto the original binding, rerouting the creature away from its intended parameters and toward a different purpose entirely. Someone has hijacked the school's oldest defense mechanism and weaponized it. A creature acting outside its binding parameters is, under house law governing bound creatures in noble house service, a creature that can be reclaimed by the appropriate authority. The Peverell Secondary Seat Co. sponsored the Hogwarts Charter. She closes the document, sits in the old cold air, does the arithmetic, which does not take long. She finds Harry in the library the following morning and tells him they are not going to let anyone get petrified this year. He looks at her across the table with the expression he uses when he is determining whether something is good news or complicated news that only resembles good news on the surface. How? He asks. Under house law, a creature acting outside its binding can be served with a legal claim by the appropriate authority. The claim compels the creature to stand down and accept examination. A silence. You want to send the basilisk a legal notice. I want to invoke Peverell Co-Charter authority to compel the basilisk to stand down before it kills someone, Hermione says. The legal notice is technically step 1 of a 3-step process. What are steps 2 and 3? Step 2 is the actual confrontation. Step 3 is rebinding or termination, depending on whether the creature can be returned to its original parameters. Harry looks at her for a long moment. Hermione, he says, that is either the most brilliant or most terrifying thing you've ever said to me. It might be both, she agrees. She spends the intervening weeks in the Founder Vault studying grey magic, not a ministry-approved category. Not dark arts either. It occupies the space between those two classifications that ministry bureaucracy has spent 2 centuries trying to collapse. The space where most of the genuinely useful magic has always lived. Soul wards, which are protections attached to bloodline rather than to place. Compulsion bindings, which are not the Imperious Curse and nothing like it. They operate through a creature's own nature rather than overriding it. House magic, the aggregate power of a lineage, expressed through its living representative when that representative understands what they carry. She learns to cast a soul ward for the first time on the 3rd of December at 2 a.m, sitting at the vault's single table while Harry keeps watch at the door. The ward does not look like anything from the outside. No visible shimmer. No sound. No light. What it does, from the inside, is close around her like the answer to a question she had not known she was asking. A boundary, precise and personal, drawn exactly at the edge of what she is. Nothing that does not belong will cross it. She sits very still after it settles. Harry, from the door. Well? It worked, she says. He asks what it felt like. She considers this for a moment. Like knowing where you end, she says. The grey magic material in the Founder Vaults is not organized the way she is used to organizing knowledge. The Hogwarts library is categorized by discipline and cross-referenced by application, an orderly system built for students who know what they are looking for. The Founder Vaults are organized differently, by kind of knowing. Some books open only when approached in a particular emotional state. Some scrolls resist reading until the reader has worked through a prerequisite text in another section entirely. It is not an archive. It is a teaching system, assembled to be learned in a specific sequence by someone who intends to use what they learn. She follows the sequence. Soul theory first, the foundational understanding that magical ability is not a technique imposed from outside, as ministry education implies, but an expression of fundamental nature. The distinction is practical, not philosophical. If magic flows from what you are, rather than from learned procedure applied to what you are, then the internal gesture before the wand gesture can look different for different people, and the results can exceed what the technique alone would predict. This is why some witches and wizards perform beyond their education, and others plateau well below their apparent potential. They are, or are not, aligned with themselves. She writes in her notebook, "The technique is the map. Your nature is the terrain." The ministry has been teaching people to navigate by the map without mentioning the terrain exists. From soul theory, the sequence moves to compulsion binding, the mechanics of engaging a creature's own nature rather than overriding it. The basilisk was bound to a defensive purpose by Slytherin himself. That binding is the creature's oldest instruction, the one that predates the diary's corrupted override. A secondary layer, however sophisticated, sits on top of the original. It does not replace it. Every secondary layer leaves a seam. She practices for 2 weeks on objects with strong ambient magic, old enchanted items from the library's discard pile. Things that have accumulated years of spell work and carry the residue of it in the grain of the wood and the worn edges of the metal. She learns to feel the difference between what a thing wants to do and what it has been forced to do. Between potential and resistance, between a creature's own nature and the thing grafted onto it. It is slow. It is uncomfortable. It is nothing like the clean satisfaction of getting a spell exactly right on the first attempt. But she improves. The practice becomes sensing. The sensing becomes certainty. And by the time December ends, she knows exactly what she is looking for. Not in theory, not from the document alone, but in her hands, in the precise quality of attention she has spent 2 months training herself to carry. When she goes to the chamber in January, she will know exactly which seam to find. The basilisk is found on the 15th of January. Not by luck, not by accident, not through a series of near misses and a ghost who floods a bathroom at a convenient moment, by Hermione, who has spent 3 months working backward from Slytherin's cipher, mapping the school's plumbing system against historical accounts of the chamber's construction until the location resolved the way a proof resolves, one deduction at a time, into something that cannot be otherwise. The preparation before the descent is immense and meticulous, which is the only kind of preparation she finds acceptable when the alternative is death. She brews the site substitution potion from a recipe in the Founder Vault's archive over 2 weeks in December, working in an empty potions classroom at hours when Snape is elsewhere. It is not a monocle charm, nothing as general as that. It is more targeted, more personal, designed for someone who knows precisely which threat they are preparing for, who has the advanced knowledge and the time to develop counter-chemistry specific to the threat's mechanism rather than its category. It tastes, when she tests the base formula, like iron in cold water. She drills Harry on Parseltongue for the entire second week of January. Not conversational Parseltongue. She has no way to teach that. What she extrapolates from Slytherin's cipher is the formal register of the language, the specific phrasing used in binding documents, in creature address, in the legal invocations of noble house authority. She runs him through every relevant phrase until the snake language sits in his mouth as naturally as his own name. He is uncomfortable with it at first, the way he is always uncomfortable with this particular ability. She does not allow the discomfort to shorten the sessions. On the 14th of January, she rolls the compulsion notice, drafted in the formal language of Slytherin's own binding record, 37 lines of precise, considered text, and seals it with a drop of Peverell wax pressed flat with the ring, while the wax is still warm. The following evening, they go down. The chamber is vast in the way that geological things are vast, not built to impress, but simply the product of older forces working at a different scale. Carved before the school above it existed, cold in a way that has nothing to do with January. The smell is stone and standing water and something beneath both, something that has no name in English, because no one has been here often enough to need one. The great stone face of Salazar Slytherin presides over the far end of the chamber, with the expression of a man who expected betrayal and simply decided, 1,000 years ago, to plan for it. Hermione has known intellectually that the basilisk is enormous. She has read the estimates, done the calculations based on references in the binding documents, adjusted for 1,000 years of uninterrupted growth in a sealed underground environment. Standing inside its basilica is not the same thing as knowing the calculations. The creature fills the chamber the way water fills a vessel, completely, without any space that is not occupied by the fact of it. The scales catch the low green light at the chamber's edges and fragment it. The head alone is the size of a small room. In the original timeline, in a different version of this night, Harry faced this creature with a sword he hadn't known he could pull from a hat and a bird whose loyalty he hadn't yet earned. Neither of them mention this. They do not need to. Harry speaks. His voice in Parseltongue is strange every time Hermione hears it, the way the language moves through him differently than English does, sitting in his mouth like something remembered rather than something learned. He speaks the words she prepared from Slytherin's own text. The formal address to a bound creature from the authority of the binding institution. The invocation of original parameters. The declaration of Peverell co-charter standing. The basilisk goes still, not frozen, not the rigidity of paralysis or pain. Still in the precise way that a very large and very intelligent creature goes still when it encounters something it recognizes as outside the parameters of its current instructions. The diary's commands have felt like the binding for months, the way a skilled forgery can substitute for the original document when no one has had cause to check the provenance. But the compulsion notice is not a forgery. It is drafted in Slytherin's own binding language, sealed with the authority of the house that co-sponsored the charter under which this creature was originally bound. The diary's commands are a secondary layer. This is the real thing. Hermione steps forward. She keeps her gaze angled slightly downward and to the left. The technique she practiced in front of mirrors for 3 weeks until it became automatic, peripheral vision calibrated for movement rather than direct sight. She carries the rolled notice at her side. She speaks, in measured and careful sequence, the formal words of the binding reclamation she memorized from Slytherin's own text. The declaration of authority, the identification of the override, the formal designation of the diary's modification as a violation of the original parameters, and the invocation of the reclamation right. The basilisk's vast head lowers. Not submission, exactly. The word is imprecise. It is acknowledgement, the recognition of something older and more legitimate than the override that has been driving it. The diary's commands do not vanish. They are present. But the original binding, properly and formally invoked, takes precedence over a secondary modification in the same way that the original document takes precedence over the forgery. The creature goes still. Completely, waiting the diary is destroyed that evening, separately, in an unused classroom on the 3rd floor. Harry stabs it with a basilisk fang, extracted carefully from the living creature's discarded scale shed, not from the creature itself, while wearing the soul ward Hermione placed on him in September. The ward absorbs the curse feedback that would otherwise travel back through the fang. The magical remnant inside the diary screams, in the way that things without vocal cords can still scream, and disperses, a piece of a soul unmade. Returned to whatever non-state awaits things that should never have existed in the first place. She cleans the fang, wraps it in 2 layers of spell-resistant cloth, sets it on the table. "That's it?" Harry asks. "That's it." He looks at the diary. The pages are blank, the leather scorched from the inside, the cover warped. 40 minutes ago they were in the Chamber of Secrets confronting an ancient basilisk. Now they are in a classroom on the 3rd floor and it is 9:30 and it is over. "I thought it would feel different," he says. "Good plans usually don't feel different at the end," Hermione says. "They just feel finished." It is, she thinks, deeply unsatisfying as a climax, which means it went exactly right. She files the formal complaint the morning after, not with Dumbledore, with Gringotts. The complaint is titled, "Petition for Investigation into Unauthorized Tampering with a Housebound Creature Operating under Peverell Co-Charter Authority." It names Lucius Malfoy as the suspected party responsible for the diary's introduction into the school's magical ecosystem. It requests a formal investigation under Article 14 of the Sovereign Banking and Records Act, which grants Gringotts investigative authority in matters involving noble house assets. This is not a ministry matter. It is a goblin matter. And the goblins take tampering with housebound creatures with a severity the ministry has never applied to anything involving the Malfoy family. The investigation is opened within the week. The Gringotts sovereign inquiry is held in the bank's Justice Hall, a chamber that smells of gold and old stone and the specific satisfaction of legal proceedings that have been operating longer than most political institutions. The walls are carved with the terms of every major goblin-wizard accord signed since the 14th century. The light comes from sources Hermione cannot identify. Lucius Malfoy arrives with 3 lawyers and the expression of a man who has been winning these proceedings his entire adult life and is only now, in this room, beginning to absorb the fact that the rules have changed. He cannot escape the censure. Under goblin law, introducing a corrupted magical artifact into a housebound creature's trigger network without the consent of the house's representative constitutes a violation equivalent to interfering with a sovereign institution's national defense mechanisms. The standard of evidence Gringotts applies is not the ministry's standard. The goblins are thorough in ways the ministry has never bothered to be. The censure is formal, permanent, recorded in the Gringotts registry in ink that will outlast any ministry records purged the next decade might produce. Lucius does not go to Azkaban. Not yet. He has too many connections and too much money, and a ministry that has been carefully cultivated to look elsewhere when the name Malfoy appears on a document requiring inconvenient action. But a documented record exists, filed in an institution the ministry cannot touch, maintained by an authority the ministry cannot override. That Lucius Malfoy interfered with a noble house's legal assets and was formally censured for it. It is the first stone in a foundation. Dumbledore calls Hermione to his office on the last day of term. The office is exactly what she expected from descriptions and reputation: circular, warm, full of small silver instruments moving through private calculations on every available surface. Fawkes regards her from his perch with one brilliant eye. Dumbledore offers a lemon drop from a dish on his desk. She declines. He regards her with the brilliant blue gaze that has always managed to be simultaneously warm and fundamentally withholding, the gaze of a man who has spent so long being the most informed person in every room that he has forgotten what it feels like to be outpaced. "You have done remarkable things this year, Lady Dagworth Granger Peverell." "Thank you, Headmaster." "I wonder," he says carefully, "if you have considered the implications of operating quite so visibly in the domain of house law. There are those who might be unsettled." Hermione looks at him steadily. "I've considered it," she says. "I've also considered the implications of a 12-year-old girl being petrified in the hospital wing while a creature moved through the school's plumbing, which is what would have happened if I hadn't done exactly what I did." Dumbledore is quiet for a moment. Something moves through his expression that is not quite discomfort and not quite reassessment, something older than either. "You are," he says finally, "a remarkable young woman." "I know," Hermione says, and collects her bag and leaves. She does not tell him about the soul ward she placed on Harry in September, the one that severs external tracking charms with the clean, permanent precision of a ward derived from bloodline rather than location. The ward she placed specifically because the practitioner's guide contained, on page 308, a footnote about long-term monitoring charms maintained on individuals without their consent, and because it took her 11 minutes to identify the specific signature of the charm and another 20 minutes to verify it had been running continuously since 1981. She suspects, walking down the spiral staircase with her bag over her shoulder and the term break ahead of her, that he knows anyway. She suspects it, and she does not go back. Year 4 is the year someone tries to kill Harry Potter by making him win a competition. In the original timeline, he faces this largely alone, Ron sulking through the autumn, Hermione doing what she can within the limits of what anyone can do for a 14-year-old who has been entered into a legally binding contract against his will by someone whose identity he cannot yet name. Dumbledore watches and maneuvers. The adults around Harry manage their own responses to an impossible situation, while Harry navigates it with the improvised courage that has always been his primary survival tool. That is not this year. When Harry's name flies out of the Goblet of Fire on the last evening of October, Hermione's hand is already in the air before the name has finished echoing in the stone. The argument she makes in Dumbledore's office that evening, Harry present, Bartemius Crouch Sr. rigid in his chair, Ludo Bagman wearing the expression of a man who entered this meeting assuming it would be manageable, is as follows. The Triwizard Tournament operates under a formal magical contract. This contract governs the conditions under which champions may be entered, the process by which champions are selected, the obligations of the organizing committee, and the liability framework in cases of participant harm. The magical contract was co-signed in the tournament's founding documents by representatives of 3 schools. Harry Potter did not enter himself. Someone entered him under a false magical signature. This is not a student circumventing the age line. The age line was a separate enchantment placed by Dumbledore. What has occurred is a fraudulent modification of the goblet itself, a tampering with the instrument that produces the contract's results. This constitutes fraud. Fraud against a participant who is a ward of the House of Peverell and therefore a member of a noble house with formally recognized legal standing. Under the Magical Contracts Act of 1811, a fraudulent modification to a magical contract constitutes a breach of instrument, which is actionable at law. The organizing body, the Triwizard Committee, as the party with custody of the goblet, bears primary liability for any harm suffered by the affected participant. Furthermore, Hermione says, as Harry Potter is currently my ward under the House Legal Protections Act of 1709, any harm that comes to him during this tournament escalates from a private civil matter to a noble house claim. The Tri-Wizard Committee does not want a noble house claim filed against them, I assure you. Ludo Bagman looks like he might cry. Bartemius Crouch Sr. looks like a man who expected this and has not identified a mechanism to stop it. Dumbledore, from behind his desk, says, "What are you proposing?" She is not naive enough to think the contract can be dissolved. What she proposes, Harry competes, because the goblet's binding cannot be unilaterally undone. But the breach of instrument remediation clause entitles the affected participant to specific relief. Consultation rights, access to all historical tournament records and champion survival documentation, a formal acknowledgement, recorded in Wizengamot archives, that his participation is the product of fraud rather than choice, which shifts liability for any harm sustained during the competition back onto the organizing body rather than onto Harry. She files the breach of instrument notice the following morning. Simultaneously to the Wizengamot, the Department of International Magical Cooperation, and the legal representatives of Beauxbaton and Durmstrang. Then she requests access to the historical tournament archives through Gringotts' neutral vault, which holds records the organizing body has never had particular interest in publicizing. It takes her 11 days to read them all. What the historical records contain, buried in the supplementary documentation that accompanies each competition. In the medical examiner's reports filed by the hosting school's infirmary, is something the tournament's governing body has accepted as an unremarkable feature of the design for as long as the tournament has existed. The average number of champion deaths per Triwizard tournament across every competition since its founding, 1.3. She adds this figure to the breach of instrument filing as Exhibit C and sends it that afternoon. For the first task, Harry has known for 3 weeks that some variant of a dragon challenge is coming. Not because anyone told him. Because 6 of the last 11 Triwizard competitions in the historical archive contained a dragon-based challenge in some form. And probability is a tool Hermione treats with the same respect she gives any other. He spends 3 weeks flying patterns she derives from historical champion survival accounts, the aerial maneuvers that have worked against large fire-breathing creatures with restricted ground mobility, the approach vectors, the timing calculations for diving under a tethered creature's line of sight. He still nearly loses his eyebrows. The horntail is faster than the historical accounts suggested, and there is always a gap between a thing practiced and a thing lived. But preparation is the distance between improvised survival and controlled performance, and the watching crowd sees the latter. Hermione has arranged, through the breach of instrument filing's observer provisions, for 3 senior Wizengamot members to be present in the VIP enclosure, formally observing the conditions of Harry's participation as legally required by the remediation clause. They watch a 15-year-old wizard move through a dragon encounter with the economy of someone who has mapped the problem in advance. Cedric Diggory, emerging from the champion's enclosure as Harry lands, gives him a single nod. The nod of one professional acknowledging another. Fleur Delacour, watching with her dark eyes measuring everything, says to no one in particular, "He was ready." For the second task, she takes the golden egg from Harry on the 1st of November, carries it to the prefect bathroom and spends 90 minutes working through the acoustic problem with paper and calculated water depth measurements. She has the clue solved by lunch. What you'll sorely miss, she reads the relevant phrase and looks at it for a long time, turning its implications in the precise, methodical way she turns anything that requires her to think carefully before she reacts. "It's me," Harry says, reading over her shoulder. "Isn't it? Or you? It'll be one of us." Hermione does not look at him. She is thinking about psychological leverage, about a challenge designed to use what a person values most against them, about the fact that she is the thing Harry Potter would miss most, about what exactly that means and what should be done with the information. She applies to this the controlled analytical attention she learned very young to apply to feelings that cannot be acted on immediately. "We'll see," she says. It is her. She is taken from her bed on the 24th of February, placed in stasis at the bottom of the Black Lake. Harry, who has known about this since January, who has been told the parameters of the task, and has practiced the bubblehead charm until he can produce it in under 2 seconds from a cold start, goes into the lake at the signal, finds the anchor station, brings her back. He also finds the other hostages. He stays past the point where the tournament's rules require him to leave. Fleur's sister. Cedric's date. Kroom's companion. He confirms every one of them is above water before he surfaces for the last time. He finishes last among the champions. He receives the highest aggregate score across all 3 tasks. For the 3rd task, the historical records suggest creature-based maze challenges rather than pure puzzle architecture. He prepares accordingly, more combat drilling, fewer logic sequences. What neither of them anticipates is the specific construction the committee has chosen: walls that shift without warning, creatures calibrated to target isolated champions, a sphinx whose riddle requires genuine academic knowledge, and a center containing a portkey whose destination the person who set it has chosen very deliberately. Harry enters the maze third. The walls close behind him. When the portkey activates, when the cup's handle connects with his palm, and the familiar hook behind the navel sensation fires, he does not let go of the handle. He does something else. He grabs Cedric Diggory's arm. He has been thinking about the final stage since October, turning the archive's warning about its unpredictability over and over, that champions who reached the center were frequently disoriented, that the transition was instant, that the moment of arrival at the portkey's destination was the most dangerous moment in the task's entire history. He has told himself, every time he practiced for the maze, trust your instincts about anything you touch. Do not assume any object is inert. He does not assume. His hand closes around Cedric's forearm. They arrive in the graveyard together. What follows is, in many respects, identical to what would have happened in a different version of this night. Pettigrew, the cauldron, bone of the father, flesh of the servant, blood of the enemy, the ritual that pulls Voldemort back into a body that is horrible and absolute and impossible to mistake for anything other than what it is. What is different is Cedric Diggory. When Wormtail raises his wand in the graveyard, Harry shouts a warning. One word. Cedric, who is trained and 17 and not yet frozen in the shock that the original timeline's unprepared champion had no time to recover from, Cedric throws himself sideways. The curse misses. Cedric Diggory survives the graveyard. They arrive back at Hogwarts together, stumbling through the portkey's landing. Shaking. White. Alive. Both of them. Alive. Into the chaos of the waiting crowd, and the noise of a tournament that has no framework for this outcome. Cedric stands up first. He stands in the wreckage of the moment and looks at the crowd and looks at Dumbledore, and his voice, when it comes, is steady, with the specific steadiness of someone who has decided exactly what he is going to say before he opens his mouth. Voldemort is back. Both of us saw it. Test us with Veritaserum right now. In the original timeline, there is one witness to what happened in that graveyard. A 14-year-old boy, already exhausted, already traumatized, already about to spend a full year being told by every institutional voice available that he is confused at best and lying at worst. In this timeline, there are 2. One of them is 17. One of them asked for Veritaserum before the crowd had finished processing what they were seeing. One of them has a father standing in the stands who watched his son come back through the maze holding someone else's arm, and who is already walking toward them. The Veritaserum examination is requested and granted within the hour. Fudge objects. Hermione reminds him, in the controlled voice she uses when the gap between what she wants to say and what will be effective is largest. That standard Auror protocols for investigating a potential emergency within a ministry-supervised event require Veritaserum examination of all relevant parties, a statutory requirement that has existed since 1923, and from which the minister does not have unilateral exemption authority. Both Harry and Cedric submit. Both examinations confirm the same testimony. Voldemort is back. 2 witnesses. Veritaserum, the same account, delivered independently, cross-referenced by protocol, recorded in official ministry documentation before Fudge has had time to formulate a containment strategy. They cannot be dismissed as a troubled boy's nightmare. They cannot be managed through the playbook of character assassination and institutional silence that the original timeline made available. They are evidence, and the breach of instrument notice Hermione filed in October means the ministry is already legally compromised in relation to this tournament, this night, this 4th champion. Fudge cannot investigate the graveyard without also investigating the goblet. He cannot investigate the goblet without opening the door to Bartemius Crouch Jr. And Bartemius Crouch Jr. opens everything. Hermione watches him try to close the door anyway. She has already sent the supplementary claim. Everywhere it needs to go. In the original timeline, what they build is a study group. A good one. Earnest students crowded into the room of requirement twice a week, practicing Patronuses and shield charms and the basic combat magic their defense professor that year is too corrupt and too cowardly to teach them. It is hope arranged into lesson plans. It matters, in the original timeline, more than almost anything else that happens in Year 5. What Hermione and Harry build in this timeline is not a study group. It begins in the summer between Year 4 and Year 5, in the library of Grimmauld Place. Sirius has returned to a house he does not love and is making it livable through sheer determination and the specific stubbornness of a man who spent 12 years in Azkaban and finds domesticity, even difficult domesticity, preferable to the alternative. He repaints the kitchen. He removes the umbrella stand made from a troll's leg, with what appears to be significant personal satisfaction. Hermione reads. 3 generations of Black family research fill the library's restricted shelving. Magic the Ministry classifies somewhere between gray and prohibited, conducted by witches and wizards who were, in varying proportions, brilliant and prejudiced, and occasionally genuinely monstrous. What they left behind in their research has nothing to do with their ideology and everything to do with their access. They worked in areas the Ministry had closed off. They recorded what they found. She reads about vassal magic in August, in the 3rd week. In a text so old the binding has separated from the spine, and she turns each page with particular care. The original conception of it predates the Ministry by centuries. Before the Statute of Secrecy, before the Wizengamot as a formal body, noble houses organized the magical community on a model that was not merely political but structurally magical. Members of a house's vassal network shared, to a limited degree, in the house's magical protections. The magic that made this work was not coercive and not transactional. It worked because the underlying bond was real, allegiance freely given, protection genuinely offered, a network of chosen relationships rather than compelled ones. The magic flowed through the bond because the bond was honest. This is the distinction between vassal magic and the Dark Mark. Voldemort's binding is not vassal magic, it is a corruption of it, a version from which the voluntary nature of the original has been surgically removed, replaced by compulsion, the allegiance extracted rather than offered. Protection in his model flows only toward the Lord rather than through the network. The whole structure inverts. The Ministry banned vassal magic partly because of this confusion. The surface resemblance between the original and its corruption was close enough to make legislators uncomfortable. And partly, Hermione reads between the lines of the historical record, because vassal magic represents a form of organized magical power that operates entirely outside Ministry oversight. She closes the book and looks out the window at the narrow back garden of Grimmauld Place, where Sirius is attempting, with limited success, to coax something flowering to grow against the stone wall. She will build a vassal force. But she will build it correctly. Voluntary membership, the right to withdraw without consequence, no permanent bonds, purpose made explicit from the first conversation. She will not build the thing Voldemort built by removing what makes it work. She spends August identifying who she will ask, and how. The Hog's Head meeting happens in October. What is founded in the back room of that pub over butterbeer and the low buzz of general wariness is not a club. The distinction is physical. She can feel it in the room from the moment people begin to commit. Something settling into the air that is heavier than the sum of the people in it. A network taking its first breath. The magic they learn in the months that follow covers more ground than shield charms. She teaches soul wards first, the personal protections she developed in the Founder Vaults, adapted over 3 years for broader application. The ward severs external tracking charms, which several members have and none were aware of. It provides resistance to compulsion magic, not immunity to the unforgivable curses. Nothing as clean as that. But it builds the capacity to recognize the texture of compulsion the moment it touches the edges of the self, before it takes hold. And to meet it with the person's own nature rather than through raw willpower alone. She teaches compulsion counters, gray magic techniques for resisting magical coercion that predate the 3 unforgivable curse classifications by several centuries. The ministry banned these alongside most other pre-statute magic, which means most witches and wizards have lost access to defenses their ancestors used routinely. She teaches Grey Ward setting, the ability to cast a space ward that reports intrusion rather than simply blocking it. Not an attack, not a formation. A monitoring enchantment with a sophisticated hair trigger that sits beneath the educational decrees' prohibitions, because it does not technically constitute a defensive formation, it constitutes awareness. Harry teaches everything else. Watching Harry teach, Hermione revises something she has been thinking imprecisely for years. She is extraordinary. She knows this now, without the false modesty that complicated her relationship with her own capability for the first 4 years of her magical education. Her intelligence is real, and her preparation is real, and the legal architecture she has built is real. But she is extraordinary in ways that require people to keep pace with her. Her mind moves faster than most. Her strategy operates several layers below the surface, and following her thinking is a skill that not everyone has. Harry is extraordinary differently. In the room of requirement sessions, he does something she cannot manufacture and cannot teach, and has spent 2 months watching without fully understanding. He is afraid of exactly the things he teaches people to face. Not pretending to confidence. Not performing courage. He is afraid, and he acts anyway, and the room full of people watching him sees the fear and the action simultaneously and understands something that no amount of technical instruction could have produced, that fear and movement can coexist. People want to stand next to him. She watches him work with Neville Longbottom, who arrived in September with 4 years of implied inadequacy already built into the set of his shoulders, and she sees something she has been trying to name since October. It is not that Harry is kind to Neville, though he is. It is that he treats Neville's capability as a given rather than a distant aspiration. And the gap between those two positions, between potential managed and potential assumed, is the distance between what Neville has been and what he is becoming. In November, Neville does not step back when Bellatrix Lestrange walks toward him in a corridor confrontation outside the room of requirement. She has not been looking for him. She has been looking for something else, and found a first-year Hufflepuff in the wrong place, and decided, on her way past, to make an example of what happens to people who look at her directly. Neville looks at her and his feet do not move. She stops. 1 moment. 2. Then she leaves, because a target that does not react is a target that costs more than it is worth, and she has other places to be. What Hermione thinks, watching Neville walk away from it, is this: the training was never about the spells. The spells are learnable anywhere. What is not learnable anywhere is the experience of being taken seriously in the practice of something real. Luna Lovegood is a revelation that arrives slowly. She is not precise in the way Hermione is precise. Her movements in training are too fluid. Her approach to spell work too apparently casual. Her relationship to drill and repetition more impressionistic than systematic. She casts spells that land with unusual accuracy in ways that do not always follow from observable preparation. And she sees things. In November, she tells the group, 15 minutes before the Grey Ward setting activates, that someone is coming to the 3rd floor corridor and they should move. The group moves. The intrusion is confirmed 14 minutes later. In January, she does it again. Different location, different timing, same quality of matter-of-fact certainty, as though she has simply noticed something that is already present, rather than anticipated something that is not yet there. Hermione records both instances in her notebook and says nothing about them for 3 months. She is waiting until she has a better theory. Ginny Weasley is the most naturally gifted combat caster in the room. This is not a close observation. Within 6 weeks of the training session's beginning, she is operating at a level that would challenge a senior Auror in conditions that would have defined the outer limits of the department's best a decade prior. She seems, each session, slightly surprised by this. She has spent her entire life in a house full of brothers, learning to take up less space than the people around her. The room of requirement operates on the specific principle of mutual protection rather than individual distinction, and what that ethic gives Ginny is the first environment she has inhabited that does not require her to make herself smaller than she is. She does not make herself smaller. In October of 5th year, Hermione files a motion in the Wizengamot. She is not filing it to win. She is not filing it to lose. She is filing it because it will create a formal structure that has not existed in the British Wizengamot in over a century. A recognized interest block, with no allegiance to either of the factions currently dividing the chamber between them. The Grey faction. 3 seat holders in formal alignment, which is the minimum procedural threshold. She holds 4 seats, 2 through the Dagworth Granger line, 2 through the Peverell secondary. The House of Longbottom, whose matriarch Augusta has been observing every move Hermione has made since the Sirius Black trial, with the particular attention of a woman who has been waiting to see whether the performance is consistent, formally contributes too. In November, a letter arrives from the House of Greengrass, whose senior members have sat carefully neutral since 1981, bleeding family to both sides of a war that gave them nothing worth joining for. The letter is precise and short. It asks whether the block's neutrality is structural or tactical. She writes back the same afternoon. Structural, she says. We do not exist to oppose Voldemort's faction or to support the Ministry's current coalition. We exist to be ungovernable by either. The House of Greengrass commits 5 seats. The Grey faction registers with 11. It is not, at its founding, powerful. 11 seats in a 50-member body is not a majority. But it is a bloc. A coherent, documented, legally recognized bloc. Large enough to deny either of the chamber's dominant factions a comfortable majority in any contested vote. Neither side can pass anything they care about without calculating against 11 seats that owe them nothing. It is the most significant Wizengamot development in years. And it is only October. She has read enough history to know what happens to people who wait. Ronald Bilious Weasley is, in his own estimation, and in the estimation of those who know him well, a good person. This is not a simple thing to be. Goodness, the practical kind, the kind that persists under the specific pressures that have shaped Ron's 15 years, requires more maintenance than anyone gives it credit for. He is loyal with the unhesitating loyalty of someone who did not have to learn it because it was the water he grew up swimming in. He is funny in the way that people who have spent their whole lives navigating large families become funny, quickly, observationally, with the timing of someone who learned early that making people laugh was one reliable way to hold a room's attention. He plays chess like he was born to it, tactical, patient, willing to sacrifice pieces for the sake of a position that won't pay off for 12 more moves. He also has a genuine gift for reading rooms, for sensing the emotional temperature of a space and adjusting his behavior accordingly, for knowing before anyone says anything that something is off. This gift exists. It is real. His own insecurities have spent 15 years convincing him that it doesn't, because a gift that cannot be demonstrated through grades or formal recognition barely counts in a house full of visible excellence. He is also, and has always been, the only person in his immediate social circle who is not, in some meaningful sense, powerful. This was always true, technically. The Weasleys are loved and laughed at in roughly equal measure. Their blood is impeccably pure, but their Gringotts vault is nearly empty, and the burrow is held together by enchantments applied over decades, by a woman whose skill is real, and whose resources never were. The Weasley family brand is a kind of cheerful, warm insufficiency that Ron has grown up feeling simultaneously protected by and trapped inside. He managed it in year 1 and year 2 by being necessary, by being Harry's first friend, by being the bridge between Harry's complete ignorance of the wizarding world and Ron's encyclopedic, effortless knowledge of it. The person who explained chocolate frogs and Quidditch standings, and which Slytherins to avoid, and how the house system actually worked beneath its official description. Then, Hermione became a noble lady. Harry became her ward. The axis of the friendship shifted in a way that nobody has articulated, and everyone can feel. In the particular way that fundamental things go unspoken, because naming them would require acknowledging that they exist. Ron is still there. He is still their friend. He is still in every corridor and every classroom and every crisis. But he is no longer the one who knows things other people don't. He is no longer the necessary one. He has been living with this for 2 years by the time Marcus Lay sits down across from him at the Three Broomsticks. The man introduces himself as a middle-ranking ministry official, the kind of functionary who becomes invisible through sheer ordinariness, the right age, the right robes, the right, slightly tired expression of someone who has been working in the Department of Magical Records longer than he intended. He shares Ron's table during a Hogsmeade weekend in December, with the ease of someone who has done nothing so deliberate in his life and simply needed somewhere to sit. He knows things about the Weasley family history that Ron does not know. Not the stories. Ron knows all the stories. The brothers who fought in the First War, the Pruitts. The family tree that extends back through names his mother keeps as an inheritance she cannot spend. What Marcus Lay knows is the legal history. The formal record. A matrilineal branch that split from the main Weasley line in 1732. A connection, documented in Wizengamot records, to the House of Pruitt, a noble house that held 2 seats in the chamber until 1819. When its status was stripped under circumstances that Lay describes with the careful neutrality of someone presenting a fact rather than an argument. The House of Pruitt-Weasley has a dormant claim. Not as significant as a Peverell claim, nothing in the current political landscape is. But legitimate, real, actionable, under the right circumstances. You could reclaim it, Lay says, in the tone of someone sharing a minor observation over their butterbeer. If you wanted to. The mechanism is different. Your family's case went through the Wizengamot directly, which makes the reclamation process more political than archival. You'd need a sponsor, someone on the inside of the right conversations. He does not say he could be that person. He does not need to. Ron sits with it for 3 weeks. He knows something is wrong with Marcus Lay. He knew it during the conversation itself, knew it the way he knows things before he has language for them, which is the gift his insecurities keep telling him isn't real. Something in the approach is too smooth. The timing is too convenient. The man knew too much about a family history that is not publicly available in any form Ron is aware of, and he presented it not with the excitement of a researcher sharing a discovery, but with the calibrated restraint of someone delivering information they have already decided to deliver. He does not go to Hermione. He goes to Harry. He tells Harry everything, the meeting, the offer, the 3 weeks of sitting with it. He tells it without editorializing, because Harry is the person he trusts to hear the unedited version and not use it against him. When he finishes, Harry is quiet for a moment. Then he goes to Hermione. Hermione sits with the information for 6 hours. When she comes back, her face has the specific stillness it gets when she has worked out something she does not like the shape of. Marcus Lay does not exist in any ministry record prior to 2 years ago, she says. A silence. Someone has been watching you, she continues. Watching all of us, probably, identifying pressure points. She pauses. They identified the right one. What she means, and what the stillness in her face is partly about, is this. Whoever constructed the operation looked at Ron Weasley's position in this group and correctly assessed that it contained a real vulnerability. Not a fabricated one, not a misread one. A genuine, structural vulnerability that exists because what is true about Ron's position is true. He is the person in this group for whom equivalence has not arrived, and the offer of equivalence through a legitimate claim is not a trap that only a foolish person would consider. It is a trap that works precisely because the thing being offered is real. We should pursue it, Hermione says. Ron stares at her, not for the reasons they intended, not because someone offered it to you as a lever they plan to pull later, but because the claim is genuine and it belongs to your family and you deserve to have it. She meets his eyes. And because pursuing it on our terms, through proper channels, with full documentation of where the offer originated, removes every piece of leverage they built this operation to create. The silence that follows is the heaviest the 3 of them have had since second year, since a week when Ron and Harry didn't speak to Hermione over something that was her fault and that she has forgiven herself for and occasionally still wakes up thinking about. If I do it, Ron says slowly, I'm not doing it because you told me to. Obviously, Hermione says. I want to, he stops. Starts again with the careful deliberateness of someone who has spent 3 weeks deciding how to say this. I'm not you. I don't have 4 Wizengamot seats and a legendary bloodline and 230 years of dormant estate waiting in a Gringotts vault. I'm Ron Weasley, who grew up in a house held together with Dragono glue and my mum's stubbornness, And if I claim this, if there's a claim to make, I want to do it as that person, not as someone who's been turned into something else by the circumstances. Harry, who has been sitting with the particular quality of stillness he carries when something important is being decided and he knows his words will land with specific weight, speaks. "That's who we want you to be," he says. Ron looks at him. "We don't need another us," Harry says. "We need you." The claim takes most of fifth year to navigate. Wizengamot channels, with Hermione's guidance. Gringotts records, access through the Grey Faction's archival rights. The documentation is meticulous, and the process is slow, and Ron sits through every step of it with the focused patience of a chess player who has committed to a long game. He insists, from the first filing, that the recognized entity be named the House of Weasley. Not Pruitt Weasley, not the hyphenated recovery of something that was taken. They have been Weasleys for 4 generations. They are Weasleys. The claim derives from the Pruitt line, but the house that is recognized will be the one that exists now, carrying the name of the people who kept it alive through a century of being too poor and too kind and too loyal for a world that kept telling them those things were insufficiencies. The House of Weasley is formally recognized in April, with 2 seats. Arthur Weasley learns the news on a Tuesday morning and attempts to receive it privately. He fails within approximately 90 seconds. He is found by his wife in the kitchen, crying with the thoroughness of a man who has held a great deal in for a very long time and has just been given a legitimate reason to release it. Molly Weasley bakes 3 separate cakes. She is very clear, when people arrive to eat them, about what the cakes are for. They are not for political recognition. They are not for Wizengamot seats or legal precedent or anything that has anything to do with the Ministry of Magic. They are for family. They are for the fact that her family has been, is, and will be exactly what it has always been, and that this is a thing worth celebrating with 3 cakes. Everyone eats 2 pieces. The crack, potential and terrible, closes before it can open. But Hermione does not forget it was there. She does not forget that someone examined the architecture of what she is building and found, without difficulty, the precise structural point at which it was most vulnerable. The pressure point was not invented. It was not misread. It was real, because the thing that made Ron vulnerable to that offer was real. And knowing it was real and not having done anything to address it before someone else found it is information she will carry going forward. She begins thinking differently about what it means to build a network, not just about the threats that approach from outside the walls, about the conditions inside them, about whether the people she has organized around a shared purpose feel, within that purpose, as necessary as they are. She does not write this in her notebook. Some things are better held in mind than committed to paper, but she does not forget. Dolores Jane Umbridge makes a specific error in December. She has been escalating since September with the methodical patience of someone who has done this before, in other institutions, and knows that the resistance always comes before the capitulation if you apply pressure correctly. Educational decrees issued at regular intervals. The inquisitorial squad assembled from students whose particular combination of resentment and ambition makes them reliable. The staff monitored, evaluated, diminished by increments. The room of requirement searched twice without result. The common rooms watched. She has also been watching Hermione. Not in the way she watches Harry. Harry Potter is a famous boy who functions as a symbol, and symbols require management rather than elimination. Hermione Granger, Lady of 2 Houses, holder of 4 Wizengamot seats, is something the Ministry has not encountered in this precise configuration before. She filed the Sirius Black petition. She filed the Triwizard Breach Notice. She registered a political faction that has been quietly making Cornelius Fudge's life more complicated every month since October. She is not a student who has gotten above herself. She is an opposing political operator who happens to be 15 and attending school. Umbridge understands this. She is not unintelligent. This is precisely why she brings 2 Aurors. The Aurors carry a warrant signed by the Minister for Magic. They stand in Umbridge's office on the 14th of December with the composed authority of people who have executed warrants in more difficult circumstances than this and expect the current one to be straightforward. Hermione looks at them, then at Umbridge, then at the warrant, which she reads in its entirety before she speaks. "Are you aware?" she says, of the diplomatic instrument filed with Gringotts sovereign records in August of this year, establishing formal diplomatic protection status for myself and my ward under the Peverell Secondary Seats Co-Charter Authority. The Aurors are not aware of this. What the diplomatic protection filing contains, what she built in August over the course of 3 evenings, drawing on 7 centuries of goblin wizard legal precedent and the specific constitutional status of Hogwarts as an institution founded under a pre-ministry charter, is an argument she will freely acknowledge, to Harry later that evening. Is aggressive and highly arguable and has not been tested in a British Wizengamot proceeding since 1887. She is not taking it to a Wizengamot proceeding. She is using it as a delay mechanism. What matters is not whether the filing would ultimately be upheld. What matters is the next 20 minutes. She has a Gringotts contact. She has had one since second year, a liaison officer named Stallrix, who has processed every house law filing she has ever made with the professional competence and complete absence of sentiment that she has come to rely on in the way she relies on gravity. In late November, following the first Inquisitorial Squad's search of the Room of Requirement, she instructed Stallrix to file a sovereign interest notice with Gringotts Security. She invokes the diplomatic protection filing at 3:05 in the afternoon. At 28 minutes past 3, 6 Gringotts security officers apparate into the East Wing corridor outside Umbridge's office. They are not Aurors. They carry no ministry identification because they are not ministry personnel. They represent the private security force of a sovereign institution with a larger gold reserve than the British wizarding government's annual operating budget, and they arrive with the particular weight of organizations that have been doing exactly this for 600 years and have never once been impressed by a ministry warrant. They do not arrest the ministry Aurors. They detain them, under Goblin sovereign security protocols, for questioning regarding potential interference with a diplomatic status claim filed under the Gringotts Wizarding Compact of 1752. The Aurors have no legal framework for resisting this without triggering a formal international incident between the Ministry of Magic and Gringotts Bank, and both of them are senior enough to know it. Umbridge's fury, when it arrives, is incandescent for approximately 4 minutes. Then it goes cold. Hermione watches the transition and notes it carefully, the shift from a person who is angry to a person who is recalculating. Cold is more dangerous than incandescent. Cold means the next move is already being planned. The Aurors are released 6 hours later, unharmed, thoroughly documented, and in possession of a formal record of the incident filed in an institution the ministry cannot edit. Cornelius Fudge is contacted at home at 11 in the evening. He is not happy. Dumbledore, from his chair in Hogwarts, watches the evening's events unfold and does not quite smile and does not interfere. Hermione cannot be arrested. Not without a diplomatic dispute with Gringotts that Fudge has neither the resources nor the political will to manage alongside everything else currently failing around him. Umbridge redirects. She is experienced enough to understand that if the architect is unreachable, the people around the architect are not. The Inquisitorial Squad becomes more aggressive toward other Vassal Force members through January and February. Small pressures, targeted detentions, the kind of escalating unpleasantness that is designed to create noise that reaches Hermione and forces her to respond in ways that can be exploited. Hermione refuses to be forced. She watches every member of the force that Umbridge attempts to pressure. She intervenes through legal channels, supplementary Wizengamot briefs, procedural objections filed through the Grey faction's formal standing, the careful deployment of precedents that make each individual action by the Inquisitorial Squad more expensive and more public than the action was worth. She does this with correspondence and paperwork and the grinding, unglamorous work of using institutional machinery against the people trying to weaponize it. It does not look like winning. It looks like nothing. For months, it becomes the entire terrain. When the Da is discovered, when Umbridge finds the membership parchment, and the meetings become a formal ministry concern, Hermione has already filed 9 supplementary Wizengamot briefs that make any prosecution of the group's activities legally contested on grounds that would require public proceedings at a moment when the ministry is simultaneously trying to suppress all public discussion of Voldemort's return. The prosecution does not disappear, but it becomes expensive, protracted, and politically incoherent in ways that serve no one. Umbridge leaves Hogwarts in May. The Wizengamot review of her educational decrees, filed by Hermione in October as a routine procedural challenge scheduled for June, is moved up to May due to the accumulated public pressure of 6 months of controversy. The preliminary review board's findings take 11 pages to deliver and are not kind on any of them. She leaves. Hermione watches her go from the entrance hall steps and thinks, very precisely, that was the visible battle. The real one is elsewhere. Dumbledore comes to Grimmauld Place in July. He arrives unannounced on a Tuesday afternoon while Harry is out with Ron. Wearing simple robes with no hat and no ornamentation, and the expression of a man who has made a deliberate decision about how to enter a room. Sirius, who answers the door, brings him to the kitchen without a word, and then finds urgent business upstairs. He sits across the kitchen table from Hermione and says, "You are ahead of me. I thought it was time we discussed what you know." She has been waiting for this conversation for approximately 2 years. Not waiting passively, she has been building toward it, accumulating pieces, deciding which ones to show and when. She has not told him what she found in the Founder Vaults. She has not told him what she has assembled from Horace Slughorn's careful admissions in potions over 18 months. Or from the archived Gaunt family records she accessed through the Peverell seat's genealogical rights. Or from the document she found in 1671 about the sworn vassalage that connects everything. She waited, because knowing something that someone else does not know you know is leverage, and she has learned not to release leverage until she understands what she will trade it for. They talk for 3 hours. He tells her what he has confirmed about Voldemort's method of magical anchoring, the splitting, the objects, the 7. She confirms the pieces he was uncertain about. She shows him the sworn vassalage document. She does not tell him about the stripping. She is not ready to show him that piece yet. Because the stripping is the final move, and final moves are not shared in July. He looks at her when she finishes presenting what she has, and what moves through his expression is not quite the thing she expected. Not pride. She has seen how he looks at people he is proud of, and it always contains a slight proprietorial quality she has never liked. This is something older. Recognition, the slightly uncomfortable recognition of a person who has just seen their own methods applied by someone who learned them independently, without instruction, and used them more efficiently. "You could have come to me with this," he says. "You could have come to me," she says. He concedes the point. It is the first time, in 5 years, she has heard him do that without qualification. They agree, in the careful, precise language of two people who do not entirely trust each other, but whose current interests run parallel, to share information going forward. What they do not agree about is Harry. Dumbledore has a theory about what must eventually happen. Hermione has a different theory. Neither of them says the other is wrong in July. Because in July, neither of them is ready to have that argument. She tells Harry that evening. All of it. He listens without interrupting, which is how she knows it is genuinely serious. When she finishes, he is quiet for a full minute, long enough that the quality of the silence changes. "How long have you known?" he asks. "Long enough to be certain," she says. He is not angry. He processes in the way he always processes the things that are too large for immediate reaction, by going still, by sitting inside the information until it becomes something he can act on rather than something that is happening to him. "What do?" he says. "We find them. Every anchor he's made, one by one. And when there's only one left, when the last one is the ring, I do what I've been preparing to do. But we clear the path first." "Together," he says. "Together," she agrees. They train through August. Not the Auror curriculum, something harder and more specific, built around what she knows about what they will actually face. For 4 years the work has been defensive. Hold Hogwarts, hold the Wizengamot, hold the public narrative. Prevent the ministry from collapsing into something worse before the real confrontation arrives. What she is building now is different. The vassal force has grown across 5th year in ways that make her quietly, fiercely proud, 30 members at its peak, with 11 at the level she had been working toward from the beginning. Combat-ready in ways that no approved curriculum had produced, and no ministry would have sanctioned. She has given them grey wards, compulsion counter techniques, the specific knowledge required to fight an enemy who operates outside ministry, legal constraints. She is not preparing a defense. The revelation comes in October of 6th year, at 2:30 in the morning. After 11 consecutive hours with the Gaunt family registry. She has been studying it because of something Harry told her in September, a memory retrieved from Horace Slughorn through patient conversation rather than the blunt instrument of a pensieve. About Horcruxes. About the specific objects Voldemort chose and why he chose them. About the gaunt ring, gold, black stone, the Peverell symbol carved into its face, passed through the Gaunt family line from Marvolo to Merope to a son who took everything his inheritance meant and made it worse. She knows the ring is a Horcrux. She has known that for months. What she is looking for tonight is something else, the origin of the ring's presence in the Gaunt family to begin with. Because nothing in the Gaunt family history explains how a family of impoverished Slytherin descendants came to possess a Peverell artifact. The document she finds is dated 1671, 22 years before the accord that divided the Peverell estate. Written in a hand she does not recognize, a woman named Aldara Peverell, recording the terms under which the ring was given. Given, not lost. Not sold, not taken. Given as a ceremonial instrument to a family recognized, under the terms herein, as holding a position of, she reads the next phrase 3 times. Sworn vassalage. The Gaunt family, the Slytherin line, the ancestors of Tom Riddle himself, were in 1671 formally recognized as sworn vassals of the Peverell secondary seat. She sets down the document, looks at the ceiling of the founder vaults. The stone above her is the same stone it has been for 300 years, indifferent to what is currently being understood in the room below it. A sworn vassal who acts against the interests of their liege house, who causes harm to the liege house's members, corrupts its holdings, wages sustained warfare against those under its protection, is subject to the legal sanction provision. The legal sanction provision is called the stripping. She reads the primary source. Then, 3 academic treatments buried in a sub-collection she has not previously opened. She sits with what she has read until the candle on the table burns low. Then, she puts on her robe, picks up her notes, and walks out of the vaults. Right, she says to the empty corridor. She goes to find Harry. The preparation takes the rest of 6th year and most of 7th. Dumbledore dies in the winter of 6th year. In the original timeline, the mechanism of his death began with the Gaunt ring. He found it, put it on, and the Horcrux's curse worked on him slowly until Snape administered a mercy at an arranged moment. In this timeline, the ring has been in Hermione's possession since the Founder Vaults, sealed and waiting, and so the hand curse was never inflicted. Dumbledore does not waste away over a year. He is alive, and he is active, and Voldemort, whose Horcruxes are disappearing one by one in ways he cannot identify the cause of, responds to his growing desperation with direct violence. In December of 6th year, Voldemort attacks Dumbledore in a place neither of them expected to meet. It is not the Astronomy Tower. It is not staged. It is the confrontation of a dark wizard who has run out of subtlety and a man who has lived long enough to have seen this coming. Dumbledore does not survive it. He is buried at Hogwarts, in the white marble tomb beside the lake, and Voldemort takes the Elder Wand from his hand, believing that this makes him its master. In his long life, Albus Dumbledore understood more about the Deathly Hallows than almost anyone alive. He understood, in particular, the principle that the wand's mastery was not a function of who last held it, but of who last defeated its owner in a genuine contest of power. In the final hours before December's confrontation, Dumbledore met briefly with Harry. What he said in that meeting, Harry tells Hermione afterward in quiet and careful words, was this, that the cloak was Harry's by right, that the stone was in the ring and she should keep it sealed, and that the wand was a burden he had carried long enough, and that if the time came when Harry needed to claim it, he would know how. Voldemort leaves the tomb with the Elder Wand. He believes himself its master. He is wrong. But this will not become apparent until the battle. The other Horcruxes are destroyed first, the locket, the cup, the diadem, through better resources and legal access than the original timeline allowed. The Gringotts Vault is not a heist. It is a legal seizure under house law, filed through sovereign channels, costing a significant portion of the Peverell estate's liquid holdings, and resulting in a receipt stamped with the Gringotts seal. The diadem is destroyed with fiend fire in the room of requirement under controlled conditions that Hermione spends 3 weeks preparing for. What they cannot yet destroy: the ring, the snake, the fragment in Harry. They do not speak about the fragment in Harry for 4 months. When she finally sits across from him in the Grimmauld Place library and says the words plainly, without cushioning them, Harry goes very still. "So I'm one," he says. "Yes." He is quiet for a moment. Then, "And the only way too." "No," she says. That's what Dumbledore believed. The prophecy frames it in terms of power, the power Voldemort gave you unknowingly. It doesn't specify the mechanism of resolution. She keeps her voice level, because if her voice is level he will be able to hear what she is saying rather than only what he fears. A soul fragment in a living host is anchored to the living soul around it. If the parent soul is stripped of its magical foundation before the fragment is separated, the fragment loses its binding. It doesn't tear, it goes dark. You won't die. "You're sure?" he asks. She meets his eyes. "I'm sure enough." Harry sits with this for a long moment. Then he nods once, with the particular economy of movement he uses when a decision has been made, and further deliberation would be indulgence. "All right," he says. "Then let's finish it. The Battle of Hogwarts is better than it would have been, and worse than she hoped. Better because 4 years of preparation means fewer people die in the opening hours. The Grey Wards hold. The compulsion counters work. The Force members fight with the competence of people who have been taken seriously in the practice of something real. Worse because Voldemort's forces have spent the same years watching her build and preparing specifically to unmake it. There are losses. Fred Weasley, Remus Lupin, Nymphadora Tonks, others whose names she does not write in any document because some things are held rather than recorded. She will say their names every year on the anniversary, alone, in a quiet room. Because being able to say someone's name is the last thing the living owe the dead. Voldemort's offer of surrender comes at the hour of stillness, the pause in the fighting when the castle holds its breath. Harry does not walk into the forest. Hermione stands in the center of the Great Hall. She invokes the Gringotts record of the sworn vassalage simultaneously with standing, the Goblin Communications Network transmitting the legal document to every Wizengamot seat holder in Britain in the span of 20 minutes, placing on sovereign public record what has never been public record before. The document dated 1671. The terms, the obligation, the violation. Then she reads the declaration of breach. She is precise. She uses the formal language of Aldara Peverell's original document, updated for the current century, because house law requires the declaration to be made in the appropriate terms, and she has never done anything imprecisely. She names the violations in sequence: the murder of members of allied houses, the corruption of Hogwarts, a charter co-institution of the secondary seat, the sustained warfare against the ward of the Peverell secondary seat across 2 decades, the systematic campaign against the liege house's interests and persons. She names the sanction. The stripping. Harry brings the ring from his coat pocket, the gaunt ring, the resurrection stone Horcrux, preserved carefully for this moment because the ring is the sworn instrument, and the sworn instrument must be physically present. He holds it out. She takes it. The ritual is not the loudest thing that has ever happened in the Great Hall. It produces no visible light, no dramatic surge, none of the spectacle that the room has witnessed in its long history of difficult events. What it produces is a sound, low, resonant, emanating from somewhere below the frequency of ordinary hearing, the sound of something very old and very structural changing state. And then a quality of shift in the air. As though a pressure everyone has been living inside for so long they stop noticing it has been released. The Horcrux in Harry goes dark. Not torn, not expelled. It dims, the way a lamp dims when the oil that sustained it is no longer connected to any source. The parent soul, stripped of the magical foundation that anchored everything it had made and become, can no longer hold the fragment in place. The fragment dissolves. Harry staggers, sits down suddenly on the flagstones, one hand braced behind him. "Harry," she says. "I'm fine." He looks up at her, and something in his face is different, lighter in a way that is not an expression, but a condition, as though something he carried for so long he stopped experiencing it, as weight has simply ceased to exist. "I'm fine. Go." Tom Riddle stands in the doorway of the great hall. He is still tall. He still carries himself with the coiled certainty of someone who has never successfully imagined his own defeat. But the magic that radiates from him is different from what it was an hour ago. Contracted, quieter, the vast accumulated architecture of his power diminished at its foundation. The stripping has done what it was designed to do. The magical basis of everything he built his immortality upon has been severed at the root. In his hand, the Elder Wand does not respond as he expects. He is aware of this in the way he is aware of everything, quickly, precisely, with the cold intelligence that has never abandoned him. The wand that he took from Dumbledore in December, believing victory to be mastery, wavers in its obedience. The stripping has stripped him of the magical coherence that made him the strongest wielder in the room. The wand, which above all seeks power, is reconsidering. He casts. The curse that leaves his wand is real and lethal and aimed at Harry, and Hermione steps between them and raises her wand. Not to kill. She has thought about this specific moment for years. What it would mean to be the person who decided, at the end, that death was the correct resolution. What kind of world would be built on that foundation? What statement it would make about what their cause was, underneath everything. She casts the binding. Not a ministry classification. Not dark and not light. The variant of compulsion binding she developed in the Founder Vaults across 3 years of practice, refined in Grimmauld Place evenings, tuned to a single function, to engage a person's own nature, in the moment, before they cause serious and irreversible harm and render them, through that engagement, incapable of completing the action. Tom Riddle's wand falls from his hand. He follows it to the floor, not dead, not injured, alive and conscious, and for the first time in his life entirely, without power over anything beyond the boundaries of his own body. He lies there. A man. The Battle of Hogwarts ends not with a duel, but with an arrest. Proper, formal, aurore conducted. With Harry standing beside her as she formally transfers Tom Riddle into ministry custody under a Gringotts witness seal, copies filed in triplicate with the Wizengamot, Gringotts, and the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. The documentation is complete before the sun rises. Tom Riddle goes to trial. It takes 3 months and is the most comprehensive war crimes proceeding the British wizarding world has ever conducted. She does not serve as counsel, she provides testimony and the legal framework that ensures it functions as a trial rather than a performance of one. Evidence, witnesses' due process applied with the same rigor she has applied to every other proceeding she has touched since she was 12 years old, and the ink ran out of space on a standard parchment. He is convicted on 47 counts. Sent to Azkaban with provisions in the detention order so precisely drafted that the procedural failures that imprisoned Sirius Black cannot be replicated. He does not escape. He does not return. He lives for 41 more years, and then he dies, and that is the end of him. Harry is staring at the floor of the courtroom when the verdict is read. Hermione sits beside him. When the chamber finishes, he says, quietly, "It's over." "It's the beginning," she says, "of the actual work." He looks at her. The Wizengamot reforms, the House Law Review, Gringotts sovereignty negotiations, the magical education overhaul, creature rights legislation, the Azkaban. "Hermione," he says. "Yes? Can we have one day?" She considers this with the same attention she gives everything. "One day," she agrees, "in the years that follow, in the rebuilt corridors of the ministry, in committee rooms and Wizengamot sessions and the slow, unglamorous work of actually constructing the world rather than simply defending against the one that existed, Hermione Granger is called many things. Reformer, disruptor, the hidden queen, which is what the books eventually settle on, a title she finds slightly embarrassing and, privately, not inaccurate. She marries Harry eventually. Not the fairy tale resolution that tabloids predicted, something more honest than that, the deep chosen partnership of 2 people who have known each other since they were 11 years old and decided, by some process neither has fully explained, that the shape of their lives makes most sense when built together. Ron Weasley serves 3 terms in the Wizengamot as Lord of the House of Weasley and is, by universal acknowledgement, the best chess player in the chamber. He passes the creature rights provisions in year 20 through a series of procedural maneuvers so elegant that his opponents do not understand what has happened until the ink on the statute is dry. He does it as himself, as the person who grew up in a house held together with his mother's stubbornness, who read rooms before he could name the skill, who chose, when it mattered, to tell the truth instead of take the easier thing. The wizarding world does not transform instantly. It changes the way all real things change, slowly with setbacks, through the patient accumulation of wins and losses and the gradual revision of what people believe is possible. But it changes, because a girl walked into Gringotts on a summer morning to exchange Muggle money, and the world showed her something she had not known was hers. And she decided, with precision, with thoroughness, with the absolute refusal to be underestimated that has been the consistent fact of her since she was 10 years old, to use it. Not to hold, not to hoard, to build. Let me know what you like to see next. The end.